Welcome to my channel, Blooms and Stitches by Anne Marie. This is the audiobook of my soon to be released book, From A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming, and this is chapter 13. I hope that you enjoy this chapter. If you haven't done so before, please remember to subscribe to my channel, hit that post notification bell, and leave a comment, leave a like. Tell me what you like in this chapter. Enjoy! Anne-Marie, we are going to Ronnie Thwaites' office. Come with me now. I'd heard Ronnie Thwaites on the radio, where he hosted one of Jamaica's most popular talk shows. He was also a lawyer, a deacon, and someone whose reputation seems to stretch far beyond politics. Rumors had been swirling throughout the community that our Member of Parliament was either about to resign or being pushed aside by the People's National Party. According to everyone, Ronnie Thwaites would be replacing him. I wasn't deeply involved in the political maneuvering, but I knew enough from taking minutes at our community meetings to understand that many of the political group chairpersons were openly dissatisfied with the current MP, me included. Their support for Ronnie Thwaites was unwavering. My own support came from a much more personal place. If Ronnie Thwaites needed my help to remove the man who had betrayed my trust, then he would have it without hesitation. By then, I was thoroughly disillusioned with politics and what it had done to my own dreams. I'd already decided that once my term with the community organization ended, I would step away completely. My focus had shifted elsewhere. I wanted to become a police officer. I wanted to get my mother and my daughter out of the community and away from everything that held us back. Most of all, I wanted to return to school and build a better future for myself. The invitation had come from the very same community woman who had led me into so many twists and turns. Shocking? Maybe, but the previous few months had taught me something valuable. Life wasn't only about avoiding difficult people. It was about learning how to navigate them. The more I confided in my cousin, the more she taught me that surviving difficult seasons often required wisdom rather than confrontation. He owned a hair salon and dealt with every imaginable personality. Some customers were impossible to satisfy, yet she had built such a strong reputation that she was considered one of Southside's most talented hairstylists before she was even 30 years old. She had one son. His father had migrated to the United States before he was a baby. When she became pregnant, my aunt's husband had been very vocal about wanting her to leave their already crowded home. But my aunt had refused. She would hear nothing of it. Their family lived on a property owned by Deno and Geddes Brewery, better known simply as D&G. Beside the property stood a boxing gym also owned by the company. My aunt operated the small cafeteria that served hot meals to the customers while providing freshly made juice to the boxers who trained there. In return, her husband maintained the property and looked after the gym. Their payment was money. It was a roof over their head. They had lived there since my cousin were babies. Now my youngest cousin was raising a child of her own while running a thriving hair business from that same property. Eventually, my aunt began traveling to the United States for seasonal work, spending 6 months at a time abroad. By then, the boxing gym had changed ownership and the cafeteria was no longer operating as it once had. Although I was closest to my female cousin, she had two brothers whom I loved as if they were my own. With my aunt away so often, my cousin naturally stepped into the role her mother had always filled. She became the matriarch of the whole household, caring for her fathers and brothers while building her own business. Like her mother, she possessed remarkable strength. She had dated her son's father since high school and, after he migrated, only had one other serious relationship. That is with a police officer whom she supported wholeheartedly. Whenever he was assigned duties outside of Kingston, she would put everything else aside just to be there with him. And she paid all the bills. She kept the household together. She carried the responsibilities that many women twice her age would have struggled to manage. Eventually, however, she realized that she was carrying far more than everyone else. She gradually handed some responsibilities back to her older brothers and began investing more time in herself and her business. It wasn't easy. Her brothers had strong personalities of their own, and arguments were common. Watching her taught me something important. She had mastered the art of surviving difficult circumstances without allowing them to consume her. She knew how to communicate with difficult people without surrendering her own peace. Those lessons would prove invaluable to me. I'd sworn never to speak to the community woman again, ever. But she held considerable influence where I lived. Ignoring her, or worse, becoming her enemy, would have been like declaring war when I already knew I had no army. There was another reason. After passing the Jamaica Constabulary Force entrance examination, I learned that every successful applicant underwent extensive background investigation before beginning training. One of those investigations was called the antecedent check. Community leaders and respected residents would be asked about your character and how you interacted with others in the community. My mother knew this and warned me not to create unnecessary enemies. My cousin went one step further. You never burn the bridge before you cross it, Anne, even if the bridge full of big red biting ants. I never forgot those words. So when the community woman invited me to Ronnie Thwaites' office, I swallowed my anger and forced myself to be cordial. But besides, I was curious. I wanted to meet the man who might replace a sorry excuse for a member of parliament who had tricked me into his bedroom. "I'll have to go up to my high school first to collect some papers," I replied. After passing the police entrance examination, I'd been instructed to submit several documents to the police training academy before my second interview and antecedent investigation could begin. One of those documents was a recommendation letter from the last school I had attended. Since I'd only completed one semester at the University of the West Indies, my recommendation had to come from Alpha Academy High. They had told me it would be ready that morning. And to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. Considering how difficult my high school years had been, I half expected them to refuse. "We can't follow you up, go up there after we left him office. You forget to know people outside of your community, Anne." The words almost made me laugh. It was on the tip of my tongue to remind her about the last influential person she had introduced me to, and to ask why she had never once questioned what happened that night. Instead, I remembered my mother's warning. I remembered my cousin's advice. The bile rose in my throat. Even agreeing to accompany her made me feel physically ill. "Why you go up at the school for?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. There was absolutely no way I intended to tell her anything about the police application. "All right," I finally said. "We will go with you." My plan was simple. I'd accompany her to the office, sit quietly in the reception area while they had their meeting, then slip away to collect my recommendation before the school office closed. Hopefully, by the next time I saw her, she would have forgotten all about me. Ronnie Thwaites' office was only a bus ride from my community. Although he wasn't yet officially our member of parliament, he was already practicing law from an office on the outskirts of downtown Kingston. When we arrived, I was surprised by how many people from Raytown were sitting in the waiting area. The sitting MP would never have allowed this. Meeting him meant passing through several security checkpoints and locked doors before you could even reach his reception area. His constituency office, ironically, had long since been occupied by several families who turned it into their own residence. I also noticed a few of the neighborhood corner boys lingering along the staircase of the three-story building that housed Mr. Thwaites' law firm. That alone convinced me the rumors might actually be true. Why else would so many people be visiting a man who wasn't yet officially their member of parliament? I couldn't blame them. Jobs were scarce, the cost of living kept climbing higher and higher. Many families struggled just to put a night's dinner on their table. For some, this visit represented hope. For others, opportunity. For me, it was curiosity. I'd long since given up believing that politicians would rescue my future. If I was going back to school or building a better life, it would be because I earned it myself. A slim, dark-skinned woman emerged from one of the offices. To my surprise, I recognized her immediately. She had graduated from Alpha Academy High the year before me because I had repeated a grade. We smiled and waved at each other, and I felt strangely comforted seeing a familiar face working there. She informed everyone that Mr. Thwaites will be with us shortly. The announcement was met with murmurs throughout the waiting room, and without hesitation, the community woman pushed her way through the crowd aggressively. "Tell Ronnie, say me and the Raytown people am out here for we appointment," she said. I watched in equal parts shock and amusement. There she was again, bold, fearless, and completely unapologetic. "Okay," my former schoolmate replied politely before disappearing behind the office door. A few minutes later, the community woman and several others from Raytown were invited inside, and this was my chance. While everyone walked towards the meeting room, I quietly prepared to leave. My recommendation letter was waiting, and I couldn't afford for the school office to close before I got there. As I was leaving, my former schoolmate looked at me. "Aren't you going in with them, Anne-Marie?" "No, sir," I replied. "The appointment wasn't mine." I stood to leave. Just then, one of the men who had already gone inside came back out. "Anne-Marie, you come from Raytown, come in now?" "The appointment wasn't mine," I repeated. Before I could take another step, a Caucasian man emerged from the office. He smiled warmly and stretched out his hands and said, "I'm Ronnie Thwaites. May I invite you inside with the others?" This was different. He wasn't staring at me like a piece of meat. He wasn't trying to impress me. He simply smiled, shook my hand, and invited me with genuine kindness. My curiosity grew. I glanced at my former schoolmate. She chuckled softly, and somehow that simple smile made me feel at ease. I shook his hand, mumbled something I can't remember, and moments later found myself sitting in the meeting room alongside people from my own community. Until then, most of my interactions with people who look like Ronnie Thwaites had been from a distance. I'd seen tourists in Ocho Rios and Discovery Bay during my childhood visit to St. Anne, but I'd rarely spoken to any of them. My father had once brought his third wife to visit us, and she was Caucasian. I still remember the way her eyes wandered around our tiny room, taking in the worn furniture and cramped surroundings. Whether she intended to or not, I felt as though she was looking down on us. Each time she spoke to my mother, it sounded less like a conversation and more like condescension. Perhaps that was why I felt awkward sitting in the office. Not only because Ronnie Thwaites was a successful lawyer, deacon, radio host, and possible future member of parliament, but because I was sitting beside the very woman I believe had unknowingly played a role in placing me in the path of sexual exploitation. So I decided to do the safest thing. I would keep my mouth shut. I would listen. And as soon as the meeting ended, I would quietly leave and continue with the life I determined to build for myself. Mr. Thwaites asked each person to introduce themselves and explain what he could do for them. I stared at him incredulously. There was no way I was going to discuss my personal business with all those people in the room. Many of them had witnessed near fights between my daughter's father and me. Some had heard our landlady cursing my mother and me when we had fallen on hard times and could not pay the rent. Worst of all, the community woman was sitting right there, listening. And she had a habit of standing at her gate and gossiping about other people's business. And I was almost certain she was the one who had told my daughter's father that I was sleeping with politicians. Sweat began forming beneath my arms. My breathing grew shallow as my turn crept closer. One person wanted a pair of shoes and food for elderly residents. Another wanted help starting a small corner stall. Someone else wanted a damaged drain to be repaired. The requests went on and on. It felt like deja vu. Only this time, the politician appeared to be much kinder man than a nasty member of parliament I dealt with before. Still, my anger grew as I remembered how that man had strung me along with promises of school payment and employment at the ministry. Then it was my turn. Every face in the room turned towards me. I felt as if I was under a microscope, being examined by people who knew pieces of my life but had never known the real me. Perhaps it was anger that finally forced the words from my head and through to my lips. Well, Mr. Thwaites, I don't want a pair of shoes because eventually they will rot. I don't want a house because they will burn it down during election time if I don't vote for you. I don't want one night's dinner because there will be other nights when I will be hungry. I have a mother who has diabetes and is not well. I have a child whose father offers no support. I graduated from Alpha Academy High School with 7 CXC subjects. I don't want promises. I want a job that will help me to take care of my mother and my daughter. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. I stared directly at him, pretending that he and I were the only people there. I was too afraid to look at anyone else. My eyes burned as I thought about my mother and my baby at home. My mother's health was deteriorating and I was terrified. The few dollars I'd earned shampooing hair in my cousin's salon were not enough to take her to the doctor regularly or to buy the healthier food she needed. She was supposed to be taking insulin, but too often that money had to be used for food or basic necessities for my baby. Sitting there with so many eyes fixed on me, I felt naked. I'd bared my soul to a man who barely knew me. He could not possibly understand how deeply I had been forced to dig just to say those words aloud and in front of so many persons. I lowered my eyes. Suddenly, Mr. Thwaites rose to his feet. "Come with me," he said. He walked out the room without looking back as though he was certain I will follow him. I did. He led me into another office, which I presume was his. "Please wait here for a moment. I'm going to get someone to speak with you," he said. "Do you have a resume?" Yes. I had several copies in the envelope I was carrying. I had planned to include one with the documents I needed to submit to the police training academy. I removed a copy and handed it to him. He thanked me and left the room, and while I waited, I tried to compose myself. I did not make too much of handing in my resume. Distributing resume had practically become a hobby of mine, and I had given out so many that I no longer allowed myself to become hopeful. I sat there for what felt like an eternity before Mr. Thwaites eventually returned. He asked me to come back for an interview with someone else in the law firm and told me to bring all my certificates and diplomas when I came. I thanked him and excused myself. I still had to collect the recommendation from my high school, and the entire experience felt far too similar to what I'd gone through before. Another politician, another resume, another promise. It was my day off from my cousin's salon, so after collecting the recommendation, I went directly home to my mother and daughter. I told my mother everything that had happened. "Another run around again, Anne?" she asked. My sentiments exactly, mommy. We always have a love party, but all of this feel just like the runaround me experienced before with the idiot MP. I thought nothing more of it. The following week, my cousin encouraged me to drop off a copy of a school leaving diploma at the law firm on my way to the police training academy. "It can't hurt," she said. "Stop thinking so much about it." I agreed. My mind was far more focused on joining the police force. I'd begun exercising every morning, jogging from Raytown towards Rockfort along the Norman Manley Highway. And I usually left home around 5 o'clock while it was still dark. Sometimes I felt scared, but after a while I got used to it. For the most part, no one bothered me. My daughter's father was rarely awake at that time and roaming the community, so I felt safer jogging in the early morning. Believe it or not, I was more scared of him than another stranger doing me something that early. I also exercised on the police field where we had once practiced netball. After a while, several women from Raytown began joining me in the morning to exercise as well. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Something was going to come through for me sooner or later, and I firmly believe it would be the call inviting me to begin the police training. On the morning I delivered my diploma to Mr. Thwaites' office, another woman accepted it and began asking me general interviewing questions. I'd not been expecting an interview, and judging by her expression, she was unimpressed by the denim pants I was wearing. I know Mr. Thwaites had told me to prepare for an interview, but I didn't know that he would live up to his words. Oh well, I thought, that makes two of us who were unimpressed. Her displeasure was about my clothing. Mine came from the hurt and disappointment I still carried from my last encounter with a politician. She told me that Mr. Thwaites would contact me when he was ready, and I shrugged and left, thought nothing more of it. Life continued along the same difficult path until one day, several people living near my home told me that a police squad car had been driving through the community and the officers were asking people whether they knew me and what kind of person I was. I wanted to skip through a field filled with daisies. My background check. My dream was finally coming closer. This meant that they were moving forward with my application. I wish they would hurry with the application because my daughter's father had started stalking me again. He would appear outside my cousin's salon or hide in corners along the route I walked home. Sometimes I would run and hide. Other times I would stand there while he cursed and hurled insults at me. I was convinced something was wrong with this man. For some reason, after the last time he had thrown stones at me, he no longer attempted to touch me physically. He also never confronted me in a crowd. Instead, he would leap from a dark corner like a blasted ghost and began his tirade. I would either stand and allow him to curse until he was tired himself, or let him walk beside me, still hurling insults all the way to my destination. So many times I wanted to slap him silly, but I was afraid he might be carrying a weapon, and I knew that one impulsive moment could cost me my life. And then I met Kafkil. Kafkil was a police officer stationed at Elliston Road Police Station. He stood more than 6 feet 4 inches tall and had the most beautiful black skin. I'd seen him several times while exercising on the police field, and we had begun having casual conversation about my plans to join the force and the training I was doing to prepare myself. Eventually, he asked me out on a date. He was always a gentleman, but I remained uncertain about entering into another relationship while I was still dealing with so much foolishness from my daughter's father. Then my silly brain offered another explanation. Perhaps if my daughter's father saw me with a police officer, he would finally become frightened enough to leave me alone. I soon discovered how sorely mistaken I was. One day, while Kafkail and his partner was patrolling the community, they stopped and searched my daughter's father. They found several small bags of marijuana on him. Instead of arresting him, they forced him to eat the bags containing the marijuana. How did I find out? Well, several of my friends knew I'd been dating Kafkail, and everyone knew my daughter's father and his unpredictable behavior. When they told me what had happened, I was not amused. Kafkail did not live in my community. He could not protect me once his shift ended and he went home. I was almost certain my daughter's father knew that I was seeing him, and I was terrified of the repercussions. I did not see my daughter's father for several days after that incident, and I had heard he was experiencing stomach problems. A small part of me found that amusing. The larger part of me remained apprehensive about what would happen next. And in the midst of all of this, Mr. Thwaites continued making his presence felt in the community. Occasionally, I saw him speaking with residents, attending church services, or simply just standing around talking with corner guys. I paid little attention. As far as I was concerned, my resume had probably found its way into a rubbish bin. My focus remained on what I'd planned, the police force. When I received a letter from the Jamaica Constabulary Force instructing me to have my fingerprints taken as a part of the application process, I prepared to complete it early one Monday morning, and I was overjoyed. As soon as I stepped outside my gate, though, my happiness was just cut short. My daughter's father approached me, and my first instinct was to run back into the house and lock the door. Fear twisted my stomach, and I was certain he had come to retaliate for what Kafkail had done to him. He was not smiling, but he did not appear angry either. I began to get a little bit hopeful. "Mr. Thwaites say if I come in my office, come see him," he said, sounding almost irritated that he had to deliver the message to me. "For what?" I asked. "All of them politicians do is make promise. Me drop off my resume long time in office," I responded angrily. He stared at me with a look of confusion, as though he could not believe I had spoken to him in that way. "Try one last time now, and make me know if him not do nothing," he said. Just like that. Then he turned and walked away. I was peeved. I was peeved at how he spoke to me. I was peeved that I knew that I had to go back to Mr. Thwaites' office. This was going to be another waste of my time, I thought. Still, I went to the law firm. I did not want my daughter's father returning later to ask whether I'd followed the instruction. The same former schoolmate greeted me at the door. "Mr. Thwaites told me to expect you," she said. "Really?" I said. My surprise was genuine. "Yes," she replied with a smile. At approximately 9 o'clock, Mr. Thwaites entered through the back door carrying his law bag. He was still wearing his deacon's collar. He greeted everyone and then asked me to sit with him in his office. When I sat, he asked me, "Can you type?" I looked at him. "A little bit," I answered truthfully. I was now concerned and a little bit curious. "Well, We need a clerical officer to work on some documents, and I wondered whether you would be willing to give it a try for a while. My world tilted. What had he just said? I did not trust myself to breathe. I certainly did not trust myself to speak. By the way, he continued, I met your daughter's father yesterday. He told me you were still waiting to hear from me about your resume. I'm sorry about the delay. I said nothing. A roaring filled my ear like the sea clamoring for my attention. Of all the people who could have reminded him about me, it had been my daughter's father. The same man whose torment had made me desperate to escape the community in the first place. Mr. Thwaites motioned me to follow him, and he led me to a computer. I stared at it. I had no idea how to operate the blasted thing. At that time, computers were few and far in between. I was more accustomed to typewriters. This machine belonged to an entirely different world. He continued speaking, but his words melted into one another. I was in my own world and my own thoughts. A job, I thought. He was offering me a job in his law firm too. And he wanted me to begin immediately. I was not even dressed for an office. I'd not prepared for an interview. I'd walked in expecting another excuse and another disappointment. Yet, he did not seem to care about any of that. He simply gave me an opportunity. You see, I'd spent months believing that my way out would come through the police force. Every early morning jog, every form, interview, reference letter, and background check had been preparing me for the call I was certain would change my life. But life did not open the door I'd been standing in front of. It opened another one. I could not have known it then, but accepting that temporary clerical position would lead me deeper into the very political world I'd sworn to leave behind. It would introduce me to power, loyalty, betrayal, service, and ambition in ways I'd never imagined. It would shape my personal life. It would test my character. And it would teach me that sometimes the road towards becoming does not begin with the opportunity we prayed for. Sometimes it begins with the one we almost refuse. Thank you for walking with me through book 1. Together, we've traveled from my childhood in Jamaica through heartbreak, poverty, single motherhood, and the hope that somehow life could become more. But my story was only just beginning. Join me in book 2, Politics, Power, and the Woman I Was Becoming. You won't want to miss this. Please remember, if you haven't done so yet, sign up, subscribe, hit that post notification bell. You won't want to miss Book 2, Politics, Power, and the Woman I Was Becoming. Have a great day. Until I see you in the next one.